Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter. Of course, you can subscribe to the channel. As you can see, I've got a very special guest, Jamie Bourne. How are you, Jamie?
I'm very good, thanks, mate. Yourself?
Good, good. He is, of course, from Punch Perfect Boxing. You can find him on his channel on YouTube. Let's get cracking, though. Let's talk about boxing, and we'll let him redirect you back to his channel towards the end of the video. First and foremost, let's start off discussing Anthony Joshua and Oleksandr USYK. As things are currently, there doesn't seem to be a broadcaster that has picked it up yet in the UK. The fight is still supposedly going on. Tickets are now on sale. But there is this possibility of the fight not being shown in the UK. Those are the rumours. What are your views on this? How realistic is that? How likely is that to happen? And how damaging would that be to the sport of boxing in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of likelihood, to me, it just doesn't seem possible, right? When we think of UK boxing, you think of Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, you think of the heavyweights. So it just kind of seems inconceivable that it just wouldn't be aired over here in the UK. I still can't picture it. It would have to happen on the night for me to fully believe it, I think. So kind of all the rumours and stuff, I'm not playing along with too much at the minute. But like you say, it's a unique situation. I don't really kind of know what's going on with it. I do think there's been some real fallout between Sky and obviously Eddie since they've broken up. And I think the kind of the news around a Coley and potentially that, Eddie Hearn's had to file lawsuits against Sky and Boxer for those approaches. Maybe that's just made things so tetchy that they don't actually want to work with each other at all at this point. It's really interesting. And when I kind of knew you would ask the question around the ramifications and stuff, I thought I'd like to know other people's opinions. So I kind of put it out there earlier on my Discord server just to get people's kind of gauge on it. And there were kind of mixed views. A lot of people felt that it was a short-term thing, that like in everything in boxing, it seems to get moaned about and seems to get in the media for a week or so, and then everyone forgets about it and moves on. There were other people that kind of felt that, AJ, in a sport that doesn't have a lot of stars, him being one of the biggest, it's a really bad thing, not him not being aired here in the UK. But the kind of angle that I thought about was the big fights here in the UK. When last year we had Fury versus Joshua being talked about and Eddie was trying to make that fight happen, it was being facilitated through the Saudis. And obviously this fight's been facilitated through the Saudis. When Joshua's lost his belts in the past, this Usyk fight and obviously the Ruiz rematch, they've had to go to Saudi as the kind of B-side to make sure Joshua gets the money as the sort of lesser split. If they don't get to recoup some of their money from their investment, and obviously Sky were willing to bid heavy, I'm sure DAZN would have been a player in it too. If the Saudis get annoyed, like some people are reporting, no matter kind of if people like their investment in sport, whether people like them hosting events or whatever, they do kind of seem like the facilitators for potential big fights in boxing. And we could come out the back of this fight and Fury versus Usyk or Fury versus AJ might not even be feasible because we don't necessarily have the Saudi relationship there for Eddie Hearn or Sky anymore. So that was one of the ramifications I thought about, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it too.
I mean, I think you make a great point about the domino effect, the knock-on effect that it could have. It could be greatly damaging. And we're not just seeing it. I mean, just to sort of digress slightly and then come back to this, you're seeing that Pro Bellum are taking Boxer to court as well now.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting because clearly you can understand Boxer's position in the sense that they saw that there were sanctions. They were concerned about their own business, but you can understand Pro Bellum's position in the sense that we live in a society where you're innocent until proven guilty. It doesn't matter what people think they know or what they do know. It's what you can prove. And they're not willing to let their business sort of crumble at that, and for them to sort of be downplayed by another rival, I guess you could say. And so what you're seeing is the sport of boxing generally taking a few knocks that could have a real effect financially. And this is one of those areas as well. I do see things a little bit differently with regards to the Saudis. And there is no right or wrong here, of course. It's just my perspective on it. For me, as far as I understand it, the Saudis wanted to enter boxing and various other sports, WWE and what have you, in order to provide themselves with a little bit of a platform to be able to express their assets, I guess you could say, their brand as a nation to the world. Of course, in the Western world, the Saudis have been heavily criticized for a variety of things. This was supposedly an approach to try and change the viewpoint, to whitewash certain things, I guess you could say. With that in mind, it may very well be the case that they were looking at Sky rather than DAZN because they wanted a bigger platform. So with that in mind, if you're talking about whitewashing, legitimizing, shining a spotlight from the world onto your own brand, so to speak, then I guess what strikes me as interesting is, does this leave an opening maybe for a terrestrial television channel like the BBC or ITV, who already have a pay-per-view facilitation in place? So I'm wondering if one of them were to step in, even if the Saudis were to then make a loss financially, they've spent so much money, they throw it around. I'm not sure that would affect them as much in terms of them being bothered. I think they think, oh, wow, brilliant. The BBC, you know, is renowned around the world. So, you know, it's known around the world, ITV as well, terrestrial channel. Maybe this is the way to go to try and promote that fight. So maybe that's an avenue that they want to look into. If that doesn't happen and it's not shown somehow in the UK, I can't, you know, even envisage the damage it would cause boxing. I mean, it's massive. Who do you think is potentially causing this? I know G-Man felt that maybe initially it was Eddie Hearn that was trying to sort of throw a stumbling block out there. I've since heard people saying it's Sky trying to cause an issue because they know after that AJ will move to the zone exclusively as a client. If you had to speculate, who do you think is causing this problem?
Like, kind of a little bit like G-Man, I probably have felt a little bit of both. It does feel like, to me, the friction between Eddie Hearn and Sky is probably the main thing causing it. It's a bit of a result of both, because they'd have to work together on this show, obviously. So the fact that Eddie Hearn's filing lawsuits against them and is clearly unhappy about the Lawrence Okoli approach, and Sky are just picking up some of Eddie Hearn's talent. We see Chris BILLAM-SMITH on this weekend as well, for example. You know, Eddie probably does feel a little bit annoyed about how things have kind of gone, and maybe Sky feel the same as well about him, Anthony Joshua, now signing with DAZN. So I think the fallout there is probably the main catalyst for it. But I just think it's just such an interesting scenario. I'm not sure entirely who's to blame for this. I do think Sky probably were looking at it as well, like, well, hang on a minute, if we're going to invest all this money on the rights, we want to be able to get one of our fighters on the platform on the undercard to get them. And Eddie's going, no, I'm the promoter of the show. You can have the rights if you want, but this is my undercard. I do what I want with it. And perhaps Sky were then like, well, okay, then we're not going to buy it also. So perhaps there's a bit of ego on both sides. And I think the friction is just, it's just touchy at the minute.
Yeah, and I've read that the Saudis are also sort of got interest themselves as to who they would want in the undercard.
Yeah,
fighters that have had links to Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth, fighters that perhaps they feel will appeal to their audience. So it's one hot mess at the moment. And, you know, I really hope from a sporting perspective and in terms of the business perspective surrounding boxing, I really hope that we are able to find a solution for this, for the good of the sport, and of course for selfish reasons, so we can actually watch it. Moving on from that, you did bring up Chris BILLAM-SMITH. He is fighting this weekend against Isaac Chamberlain. You did a fantastic preview on this, by the way, so I'd urge anybody to go and check out Jamie's preview on this. So I'm not going to sit here and sort of ask you to delve into the details that you did in your own channel. People can check that out there. So instead, what I want to ask you about is how you think each fighter will potentially progress if they were to win the fight. What are the ramifications of a victory and a defeat for each fighter?
Yes, I think for Chris BILLAM-SMITH, Sky seem to be cleaning up all of the UK cruiserweight talent. Obviously, they want to add a Coley to that, as we just mentioned. They'll have to wait a little bit longer, it looks like. But I think for Chris BILLAM-SMITH, he's mentioned this in an interview that I was watching yesterday. He wants Richard Riakporhe again. The first fight was not a fight that exactly caught fire, but it was one that was competitive throughout. Riakporhe was able to sort of imprint his game plan on it a little bit more so. And I think Chris BILLAM-SMITH has kind of felt, for the most part, you know, since that fight, BILLAM-SMITH has actually had a little bit more momentum than Riakporhe. Riakporhe kind of went silent and stagnant for a year or so under Dillian Whyte. So I think Chris BILLAM-SMITH's probably aiming at Riakporhe, and Sky probably dangling that carrot. I'm not sure it's what Riakporhe wants. He'll want a world title and probably sees BILLAM-SMITH as a step back, but that's at least a carrot for them to dangle in front of Chris BILLAM-SMITH. And I also think Sky can say, look, if you want to fight a Marius Bradis or someone like that, we're willing to back you financially to do so. So I think for BILLAM-SMITH, there's a lot of kind of options to keep moving forwards if he does get the victory. And he's had some decent victories on this little run that he's on. For Isaac Chamberlain, I think it's a complete career turner, really and truly, because he's had to take this fight. And he said he jumped at the opportunity because although he was boxing on Channel 5 and he felt like he was getting some recognition, he felt like he was never really to land a big name or a domestic rival after what happened in the Okoli fight. And I think for him, I mean, it's a complete career changer. He'll be right up the rankings. Billam-Smith's like top 10 with every governing body, pretty much top 3 with the WBO and the IBF. If Chamberlain can take those rankings over, and Chamberlain doesn't have the same kind of loyalties that Billam-Smith has, because obviously he trains with a Coley. He can't target a Coley necessarily, even though he's won with the WBO. Chamberlain's probably a little bit more free to do as he pleases. So it'll be interesting. As I mentioned, Sky have got so much stock below these two guys as well that even if they do lose, Sky would happily happily throw him in with a Lawal or someone like that that's coming up. So,
and the thing is as well with Chris BILLAM-SMITH, he gave an interview recently whereby he did say, I wouldn't fight a colleague, he wouldn't fight me because we're friends. There'd also be the problem about only one of us being able to train with Shane.
Exactly,
and I think he's got a closer relationship with Shane. He's been there for a longer period. So even if a colleague wanted to take the fight himself, he'd probably think twice about having to leave his trainer. So that seems to be out the picture. He was speaking about Jai Opataya, and he was saying, listen, it would be a fight I'd like, but realistically speaking, with that broken jaw, he's going to be out until at least January, which is suggesting that Chris BILLAM-SMITH would want to move earlier than that. He was almost talking like he was unavailable. So he brought up Ilunga Makabu and also Gulamarian. Gulamarian, of course, has not had a title defense since 2019. No idea what's going on over there. It's mad how they haven't forced anything there or stripped him or something. But yeah, hopefully that could get a little bit more active in that regard. But you're right. It seems like Chris BILLAM-SMITH almost has, I don't want to say fewer options, but he seems more restrained in where he can go. I know that you're not a huge fan of Chris BILLAM-SMITH. I know you like him, as a person, but you find him quite boring, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that, or just expand on that?
I think it's because sometimes I've looked at the matchups that he's been involved in on paper and been quite excited for them, and then they've just ultimately not delivered. And I kind of feel like for every good performance BILLAM-SMITH has, we kind of see a bad performance that follows alongside it. I think of that little fight run that he had after Irakpur, where Craig Glover knocked him out, Nathan Fawley knocked him out in fights that were perceived to be close heading in. We're like, okay, we're excited about Chris BILLAM-SMITH now. He seemed to be doing the right things under Shane, kind of the same thing that Okoli was doing, punching long, punching hard, really maximising his power, being a big cruiserweight. And then it just kind of felt like there were a couple of fights where perhaps he got a little bit too overexcited with the power, and it resulted in 3 or 4 explosive rounds early on, but then him struggling to maintain the pace a little bit. And going into the McCarthy fight, I thought this is going to be a really fun fight. And I thought early on it was quite fun. BILLAM-SMITH was hurt. He seemed to sort of bounce back. But then it was a bit of a cuddle fest late on. And then the rematch, I kind of felt McCarthy just didn't look like he was at all prepared for what was coming his way. So it's not so much I don't like him as a fighter, but I think ultimately sometimes when I've been really excited to watch him fight, he's not delivered to my sort of expectation.
Yeah, I actually think that I agree with you, by the way, everything you've said, but I do actually see a bit of an upside with Chris BILLAM-SMITH from a business perspective. I like both guys. I like both fighters. I know you're a big fan of Chamberlain. I know you're rooting for him. I'm kind of neutral because I do like both guys. So I'm just going to be able to enjoy the fight as a neutral. But one of the things that I do feel about Chris BILLAM-SMITH, firstly, because he's from Bournemouth, it's not a typical boxing city. There's a potential opening there if he can really capture the imagination of the locals. Because of the sort of nature of Bournemouth, a seaside town, a nice town, if you start to build up sort of domestic rivalries, so let's say he was to fight Richard Riakporhe, I can imagine the Bournemouth area really throwing their weight behind Chris BILLAM-SMITH because it could bring so much tourism. You can imagine there's worse places to go in the UK for a weekend if people go and see a fight, right? So you've got that element. He's a likable guy. Of course, his moniker is the gentleman. And although his style is perhaps not beautiful for the purist, because the majority of his work is up close, his good work is on the inside. 100%. I do think that although there's a lot of work to be done, I sometimes feel when I'm watching Chris BILLAM-SMITH that he's got some of the attributes that could enable him to upset a few guys. So for instance, Lawrence Okoli, we know on the inside, is very, very good at smothering, tying up, stopping a guy work. And he mauls you and he tires you down. He really wears you down on the inside, Lawrence. I did a video a long time ago in the build-up to the Blavatsky fight where I was showing the sort of technical details of how he does things like that. Well, Chris BILLAM-SMITH is the opposite in that he wants to work on the inside. So I can imagine in sparring, he's having to deal with a guy who's brilliant at tying you up and nullifying you. So he's obviously then working on how to be destructive on the inside. Additionally to that, Okolie is very good at range and stopping you from getting in. He's hard to get to, Okolie. So with that in mind, there's no better fighter in the division to spar with if you want to work on closing that range. So when I marry those two sorts of ideas, and I think, fine, he's not particularly great at range. He has developed a more thudding jab. He's developed that range, as you alluded to with Shane. But if he's working in the gym on closing the range against a guy who's tough to close the range against, and then when he's inside to be destructive against a guy that won't necessarily let him work, and he's learned to do that, I can imagine him through some messy performances, you know, upsetting a guy or two. So I don't know. I feel like potentially there's an upside there. And that's why I find it interesting that Boxer have only signed him on a one-fight deal. Because I think they're waiting to see how this fight turns out. If he beats Chamberlain, like you're saying, Sky are sweeping up a lot of the cruiserweight talent. I can imagine there being some openings there for Chris BILLAM-SMITH. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, I'm not going to ask you for your prediction. People can check that out on your channel. So I'll quickly share mine. I do believe that Chamberlain is a very slick fighter, but has been out for a long time. I do believe it's not ideal preparation against a guy who's really going to take you to the wars, because that's what Chris BILLAM-SMITH is about. He's a very difficult fighter to deal with, physically speaking, and he will punish you to the body, and he'll find angles for short hooks and uppercuts, and it's grueling. And I'm not sure if being out for such a long time is ideal preparation for such a grueling opponent. And so I expect Chris BILLAM-SMITH to drown him late, so to speak. I don't know whether that means a stoppage or whether that means coming on strong. But in terms of the dynamics, the McCarthy fight, I can sort of see that as sort of like a blueprint of how it will go. Finally, I know you have to go. We've got a little bit more time, 10 more minutes. So can I quickly ask you about Ben WHITTAKER? I know you're a massive connoisseur of the amateur game. Anybody that wants to know anything about the amateurs, you can definitely check out Punch Perfect Boxing. He's brilliant at it. Ben WHITTAKER is a guy I've also followed through the amateurs. I think he's hugely talented. But tell us what you think about Ben and his future. Is he the next star of British boxing?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see Ben's career unfold. I did a video off the back of the Olympics where I kind of said, I went through each fighter from the Tokyo squad and said, where will they sign with? What do I sort of think they'll achieve in their careers? What do I sort of see their ceiling at? And when I got to Ben's part, I said, I think for him, he's kind of the money maker that I see from the Tokyo squad. He's just got a real charisma about him. And he actually liked the video and shared it on his Twitter, which was nice at the time as well. So he acknowledged it. But he's quite big into his anime. He's a bit of a different side to a boxer that you usually see. I think he's quite fun, quite likable, but he's also got that James DeGale element where people are going to hate him because he just says it how he is. He's been a pundit on Sky and he watched the Brad Ray fight and went, I could beat him now. Says he could beat Dan Aziz in his first couple of fights as well. So he's very confident, and I like that about him personally. I tend to like fighters that are quite arrogant because I like to see that sometimes in a fighter. But I think his style, a lot of people have said they don't see how his style translates into the pro game. And I think it does. And the reason being is in the amateurs, he was the definition of stick and move. He was very light on his feet. The jab was everything. The 1-2 was everything. And he'd never really load up on too much. A lot of it was through injury as well. We couldn't throw the right hand in the Olympics, had to have surgery on his shoulder. But that kind of stick and move element, he's now linked up with Sugar Hill Stewart. And to kind of, you look at, what he done with Tyson Fury, who was a stick and move guy prior to him going to Sugar Hill. The way that he's been able to transform Tyson Fury into this boxer puncher almost that is able to generate power in every single shot. And I actually got to watch Sugar Hill up close when I went to Vegas. He was in Daenerys gym, and kind of just the little things he was teaching about really how to sort of generate that power and the where to get the technique from when throwing your shots. I think Ben's going to be able to transition a lot better than people anticipate. It's not going to be straight away, obviously. It's going to take time. But I think Ben's got a really exciting career ahead of him, one where I think more people are going to root for him to lose than to win. So people will probably tune in for that element. But I think he's very good. 25 years old, he's just turned. So just, if he's still around in sort of 5 or 6 years, I imagine that he'll get to a decent level in that time. And I'm excited to see what Sugar Hill can do with him.
In terms of those little nuggets that you heard Sugar Hill sharing, could you share any of those with us? Do you remember exactly what he was saying, how to produce that power for a guy like Ben?
Yeah, so obviously he was in Daenerys' gym that day, and he was kind of overseeing the camp for Inoue, but he was specifically working with a female fighter whose name I didn't catch when he was working with her. But it was kind of just the little things she was doing in terms of the way she was stepping into her shots. She was kind of almost throwing but not stepping at the same time, and she was really losing power in the shots. And it reminded me of this video of Lennox Lewis and Chris Eubank. Have you ever seen it on the punch bag at Chris Eubank's house when Lennox Lewis sort of teaches him to sort of the way to throw the jab? Yeah. And you hear it, and you hear the difference in Eubank's jab when he does. It was almost like that watching it. You heard the difference in her punches just by the way that Sugar Hill was sort of telling her to sort of position herself and how to stand. So it's really interesting. Obviously, a lot of it probably went over my head. Probably would have been more for someone like yourself that's more technical than me. But it was really interesting to kind of see those results there. And then even just the sound of the punches on the pads and the bag was like, okay, that's going to be really interesting for someone like Ben, who doesn't look to generate power and doesn't have to really in the amateurs. That's not the MO. So yeah, really, really interesting to see what he can do with Ben.
And also, when you look at Ben Whittaker's physical construct, when you look at a lot of the Kronk fighters, they are quite tall and wiry. I mean, I know Lennox Lewis was tall and broad, but he was a tall fighter. Tyson Fury, quite tall and actually slim. He's not as broad as people might assume. Tommy Hearns, of course. So, you know, you look at through the history of the Kronk style, it does seem to marry up quite well with his physical construct. 100%. And like you're saying, he was a stick and move type of guy, but he's very agile. He's not a sort of guy that will just move around the ring. He can stay in the pocket and show upper body movement without moving around the ring. So it's not all, you're right, he's predominantly a stick and move fighter in the amateurs, but he can stick and still show that movement with little steps here and there. I think he's a huge talent. My brother, I'm not sure how they met, but he sort of speaks to his dad. My brother sort of somehow knows his dad. And my brother always says to me, listen, regardless of how he's going to come across, his dad is such a lovely guy. And I think Ben's that sort of same character. So he knows, I assume, how to create the persona. And you need that, because it's not necessarily about whether you're loved or hated. You have to be one of the two rather than people just being different to you. Otherwise, they're not going to tune in. And I can imagine, like you're saying, him rubbing up people the wrong way. But also, I think there'll be people that see through that and see him as an entertainer rather than this arrogant bad guy. He's just an entertainer. And something I've always felt, as long as you're humble with the fans and with reporters and basically non-fighters, as long as you're humble in that regard, if you're cocky towards other fighters, I think you get away with it. I think what people don't like is when fighters are arrogant or rude to fans or to non-fighters. But we'll see. Hopefully he backs it up. I know you have to go, Jamie, so thank you very much for joining us. Please tell people where they can find you on YouTube.
Firstly, mate, thank you for having me on. I always really appreciate it. I'll watch your channel, so it's cool just coming on here as a fan, really, and getting to chat with you about boxing. For anyone that wants to find me, just search
I'm always delighted.
Boxing.
No, sorry, repeat that. There was a bit of delay. Repeat that, sorry.
Yeah, if anyone wants to find me, just search Punch Perfect Boxing. I'm sure I'll be in the comments replying to people or whatever, so you can find me probably down there. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. Anybody that wants to know about Jamie's encyclopedic knowledge of the sport, check out his channel. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Appreciate your time, mate. Take care.
Appreciate it, mate.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. Take care. God bless.